Hi everyone, welcome to our dietitian talk. Today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about sip or skip, the truth about health drinks in today's world. There's so much craze and rage about all of these drinks that we need to be having every day. And we're going to be here talking with a few different dietitians, one, myself, and these two other ladies here. But first, I'd like to for us to introduce ourselves for those of them of for them for oh my gosh, I can't speak right now. But anyways, let's just get to introduce ourselves and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. I'm Damaris Hunger. I'm a registered dietitian on the Married to Health team. I'm also a student of naturopathic medicine. And you can find me on Instagram under damarishunger.rdn.
Beautiful.
I'm Rachel Canton-Frias, registered dietitian, also with Married to Health. I specialize in kind of GI disorders such as SIBO and IBS.
Very nice. And I'm Laura. For those of you that don't know me, I specialize in hormonal health, women's health, and lots of emotional eating and a lot in the emotional world realms. And yeah, like I mentioned before, we're really happy to bring this topic because I think there's so much craze, there's so many products out there. It can get really confusing and overwhelming even to choose, okay, are we really having something that is positive to our health, or are we actually using something because of the marketing and then we're not realizing that perhaps we're getting a little bit more harm than actually good. So with that in mind, yeah, there's so many topics that we can just go about, but let's just start talking about one of the biggest craze that I hear a lot, which is kombucha. So if any of you have some thoughts about that, we can start with kombucha and then we can go our way down with all of the other different types of like drinks. So kombucha, this craze about kombucha, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love kombucha. I think it's a great source of probiotic food to get in, some of your probiotic foods as a food source on a daily basis. We know we want about like 5 servings of probiotic foods every day. For kombucha, that serving size is roughly about like 6 ounces. So it can be a great source of probiotics. Of course, with kombucha, and I'm sure many of the drinks that we'll kind of discuss today, one of the biggest concerns is always that sugar content and that added sugar content. And kombucha can be one of those places where many of the brands are kind of adding a really high amount of sugar. So that's always the number one thing I recommend you check first is how much total sugar, how much added sugar. Ideally, there's no added sugar. You're going to have some sugar because they need that for the process of the fermentation and getting those probiotics in there. But if they're less refined sources, like from, juice or something like that versus just the added table sugar, that's always a better option. And then I typically like to at least keep it under that like 1 serving of carbohydrate. So like 15 grams is a general rule of thumb. But again, kind of the lower, the better, I think.
Very nice, yes. And also something that I see often with kombucha is that sometimes there's companies that they actually do the processing with it, like they need the sugar for the fermentation, but then some companies add extra sugar after they do like the fermentation process. So that's what I think Rachel was talking about, just really wearing your glasses and your detective coat of, okay, well, is there any added sugars? And in the ingredients list, what are they really, is it really matching what they're putting in the front with the back of the ingredients? And also, just to put out there, like not everyone can tolerate kombucha. So just to put it out there, like just because it sounds healthy, and it is for certain people, it depends where you are in your journey with your own health and in your phase. If your gut is not in a state where it can tolerate some fermented foods, because it's fermented, this is going to have some issues for certain people. So again, it's like, yes, there's really lots of good foods out there, new products, new amazing stuff. But one of the questions that you want to ask yourself is, okay, can I tolerate these? And maybe you give it a try, but then it's really important that you're also checking within your body and noticing any symptoms, because your body's constantly giving you feedback. And that's the feedback you want to bring in and just notice, because sometimes you may get like a little bit bloated or a little bit of like some sort of like symptoms whenever you do take this kombucha. And then you may wonder, but this is supposed to be good and healthy. Well, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. But yeah, that's the only thing that I wanted to add about that kombucha thing. But if Damaris, you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah. I forgot to mention that I work with a lot of kids and teens and chronic diseases. But in terms of the population of kids, I think it is important to be aware that kombucha does have a little bit of caffeine. Most kombuchas do. It's not the same amount as coffee. It's about a tenth of coffee. It's about half of what green tea would have. But it's just good to be aware of when you're making those decisions of whether to buy kombucha. There are some brands that use herbal teas that are not black or green tea, but most kombuchas have a tiny amount of caffeine.
Yeah, that's a great point. I recently have been reducing my caffeine intake and had a kombucha with dinner one night and like could not fall asleep. And I was like, oh my gosh, it must be that kombucha I had not only a few hours ago. So great point.
Yes, and another thing that I forgot to mention too with kombucha is like sometimes they come in really big bottles. And you want to start low and slow. If this is something that you're not used to consuming, then you may want to add actually like maybe a teaspoon or a tablespoon, and then build yourself up until you get to a comfortable amount. And sometimes you don't need the whole bottle. You might need like 2 ounces to 4 ounces is enough for that inoculation, if you're adding other sources of fermented foods too. And then another question that I have,
one more thing. Yeah, because it is like a food rich in bacteria, you just want to be careful with how you store it, especially around kids. You want to be safe, refrigerate it if you're not going to drink it within the next couple of hours. Just safety precautions for kids.
Important. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, if there was a brand that you really like for kombucha, that you trust, that you usually have looked into the ingredients, and it's one that you usually take, whenever you're buying or even drinking kombucha. Is there one of the brands that you prefer?
I think the GTs I know there's many different flavors. I know the ginger turmeric one. I think they don't have any added sugars. It's sweetened more so with some of those juices like ginger juice, things like that. So I'm not familiar with all of their flavors, but I think they're definitely generally one of the brands I opt for most often. There's a local kombucha here also. If anyone is here in Hawaii, they're called Big Island Booch. They sell them at our Costco's. They're really good. They total of 10 grams sugar and less than 1 gram of added sugar. And they're just in like little 8-ounce can sizes. So I really like them as well, especially again, because I can buy them at the Costco.
Very nice. Yeah, I was just going to say that I usually, whenever I'm going to take kombucha, I do a local company that usually they do a really good job, because they have to do like small batches. It's just local. Again, you're using local produce, local people. You're helping into the local economy, just added benefits for people. And there's one that is called Good Culture, and they do an amazing job at actually they don't pasteurize whatever you say that word, the kombucha, which some companies do that, but then it's like, if you pasteurize it, then are you killing the probiotics? That's another kind of thing that we want to look into. Did you have any brands in mind, Damaris? No. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'll just echo my team here. Yeah, just be aware of the flavors, of the brands, is it using green or black tea if it's a kid, or is it using herbal teas? There are some that are made with like lemongrass as well and things like that. So there are a lot of options.
Very good. All right. So that's on the side of kombucha. It's a big one. So would you say sip or skip? What's kombucha for each of you?
I would say sip with those considerations that we all mentioned.
I say sip as well, depending on the considerations.
Yep. And I would also say sip, but I prefer the herbal ones for kids.
Beautiful. Next on the list, we could talk about and spend some time talking about functional sodas. I think that's a big category. There's so many sodas in the market now currently, like targeting like gut healthy and all of these things. One of them that come to mind is Olipop.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on functional sodas?
I guess I can start. Okay, so compared to what I guess is the question, if you were trying to replace soda drinking, I think it's a fantastic change. Of course, it's more expensive than typical sodas, but that might be a good thing as well because you don't want to be depending on that for the entirety of your beverages throughout the day. But what's nice about Olipop, there are a lot of flavors that imitate typical sodas, but very, very low in sugar, about 2 or 3 grams, and then quite high in fiber. They've got a combination of different kinds of fibers, Jerusalem artichoke, I think inulin. They've got many different fibers, so you can't tell that there's fiber in it. So the whole benefit, I suppose, is that it's low sugar and high fiber. And yes, I think as an alternative to soda, I think it's a great idea, especially for people who are trying to wean off of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's good to point out how you're mentioning kind of the fiber, kind of echoing what Laura was saying earlier with the tolerance. It can be one of those that's problematic for people because of that added fiber. And that's also where they're marketing towards that like prebiotic. So I think just a good overview of that prebiotic versus probiotic of the kombuchas. The prebiotic is the food that we are feeding our probiotics, as opposed to the kombucha, which has the actual live bacteria in it also. So sometimes that can always be really confusing with all these like marketing terms that we're getting thrown at us. So that is the difference between some of those benefits.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm just echoing both of you because yeah, it depends on, where are you coming from? Are you coming from a place of I'm having sodas every day? This might be a much better alternative. But then also it's something that we want to keep an eye on. It's like, do we need to have them every day? Like we also need to kind of go back slowly to simple things, whole foods, simple water with maybe a little bit of pinch of salt and lemon. It's cheaper and it also does the trick of hydration. So I think it's a beautiful, fun idea to kind of add that sparkling kick and that sweetness. And on top of that, it has some of that prebiotic fibers. So sounds like a great deal. But also just know that just because it's healthy, you can overdo healthy stuff too, right? So if we drink too much water, that can lead us to something. If we drink too much Olipop, that can also have an effect. So it's like having a little bit of a pull and push dance with all of these products. It's like, okay, I'll have them here, but make sure that I'm also having like a solid meal, and it's not something that I'm just drinking every day at all time, just because it's healthy and gut friendly, right?
Yeah, I do want to point out there are a lot of like competitors to Olipop, like Poppy, Culture Pop. They are a little bit different. Olipop itself is the one that has much higher fiber. It's got like I think 7 to 9 grams. The other ones usually have like 1 to 3. So there's quite a bit of a difference. All of them are lower in sugar, not the same. So just be aware of that. Like others have mentioned, if you don't tolerate fibers very well yet, then maybe choose one that's not so high in fiber. But if you are trying to include fiber, just be aware and check the labels. They're not all the same.
What would you say it's like a red flag to look for whenever they're like looking into the ingredients list, whenever they're choosing one of these functional sodas out there with so much product and names and marketing?
For me, I think it's just I guess this is a general principle with drinks. We haven't really talked about this yet, but when you are consuming a drink, there is a danger of consuming a lot of added sugars very quickly in a drink. Specifically talking about kids, the recommendation is no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day, and that is easily found in one soda can. So it could even be, of some of these functional ones, it could be 2 cans or 3 cans. So it depends on you've got to be very aware. You want to compare, and first of all, what I like to check is what is the added sugar content in the ingredients list. Also, you sometimes want to be aware, are there things like emulsifiers and things like that? Most of them don't, but yeah, that's something that I like to be mindful of in these types of drinks.
Yeah. And speaking on that kind of added sugar and increase, calorie intake as well, think about kind of like what Laura was saying, like, when are you having this drink? Is it continuously all day, or is it kind of like with a meal where you've also had some other, high fiber sources from your fruits and vegetables and whole grains and protein and some healthy fats, and you're giving your digestive system kind of a lot to do while you're also having that drink, rather than just having this drink where without anything else, and your body's going to very quickly absorb a lot of that glucose and spike your glucose pretty quickly. So that's another thing to consider. I also want to point out, kind of with drinks, and as Damaris is saying, just a really easy way to kind of get in those calories, and kind of those calories that we tend to do a little more mindlessly because we're not necessarily sitting down and having a meal. So it is one thing that can happen really mindlessly. And one thing we want to consider for gut health is interrupting the migrating motor complex, which is kind of like a clean sweep through the digestive tract in times of fasting. So, we want to aim for like 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours between meals, and anything with calories will stop that migrating motor complex. So if you are someone who is continuously sipping drinks that have calories, even if they are very minimal and kind of following a lot of these other guidelines that we did talk about, you still are stopping that from occurring, because you've then given your digestive tract something to work on. So that's where, you can consider things like the water and teas, things that don't have the added calories.
Yeah, I think you bring a really good point, because I have lots of patients, women specifically, that come and are like, I want to lose weight. And then we go into like, okay, what are you eating currently? And they're like, no, I'm eating all of the right things. I'm doing all of the right stuff. And then we go over like a little food journal, and then we see like the drink section. And it's like, you don't really realize that this is also adding, not to mention metabolically, your insulin is also has a respondent effect. So if you already are not flexible metabolically, and you're kind of like struggling when it comes to weight loss or other stuff hormonally, then, kind of like what Rachel was mentioning, you want to add 3 to 4 hours of a break, so that your gut is also like cleaning itself, but also your insulin is having a little bit of a break. Because if you're constantly like pumping on that insulin, then your body's working constantly. And then insulin, we know that it's a massive hormone that can store fat if we don't use that energy. And once our cells are like saturated, then it has to take all of the rest of your sugars and glucose into fat cells, so that for survival reasons, you don't want sticky blood running in your system. So I think it's a great point that you bring, Rachel. But yeah, sip or skip when it comes to functional sodas?
I'll give it a like event-based sip. Definitely not an everyday thing. And I like this is a good question to ask ourselves, like, why do we drink, and when do we drink? Because a lot of these beverages really are pleasure more than nutrition, unless we're including it with our meal. Like Rachel mentioned, between meals, it can have a function that's not very necessary. Between meals, you want to be drinking water. The exception to that is you can do like lemon water, or you can do herbal teas, which you can do hot and cold, and you can do fruit teas, hot or cold. Like, all of those are no calorie, nourishing, good options. But yeah, these are like fun drinks, and so I think for a fun occasion, this is great. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll call it like a sideways.
Yes, I call it also like yeah, like if you're gonna have it, you don't have it every day, and you feel like a little soda and something different other than water, then that's wonderful. Is it like a meal replacement? Absolutely not. Um, but yeah, and just like wear your hats and just know that there's so many brands out there, and you got to do, your a little bit of research in the back of the label.
Also, another idea if you want a fun kind of drink is you can buy like an organic cold pressed juice or something like that, and then just add some sparkling water to it. It's very similar. You don't have the fiber, but if you want to have a special occasion, it tastes fancy and it's not nearly as sugar laden as if you were to do a soda. It still has like the high end feel. You can make it, you can add some herbs, some lavender into it, or things like that. But yeah, it's kind of goes into this category of functional sodas, although this would just be like yummy, a little bit sweet and flavorful. Not really any fiber, but anyway, that's another idea, especially with kids.
Very nice. So next on the list I have are electrolytes. Lots of talk about electrolytes and replenishing their minerals, and like it's something I hear a lot lately. I don't know if it's because it's also something that I'm trying to do in my own life, like trying to be a little bit more aware of like replenishing my own minerals, and like knowing that, in periods of high stress, your body goes through a lot of minerals and vitamins. And so making sure that you're replenishing them through food and hydration, it's important. And also if you're an athlete, that's something that you need to be paying attention. But yeah, there's a lot of electrolytes in the market. So what are your thoughts on electrolytes?
I think it's, again, kind of that same thing of, especially electrolytes is another one. A lot of these drinks are, but look at that sugar content. Because electrolytes will, without that sugar content, taste like salty, minerally water. So a lot of people will try to, or brands rather, want to mask that flavor. It typically takes a lot of added sugar to do so. So, your drinks like your Gatorades and your Powerades, things like that, they do have electrolytes in them, but they also are sweetened a lot.
And
Yeah, and if they're artificially sweetened, some of those can, be disruptive as well. I personally, I like that brand LMNT, like just spelled, or Element and spelled LMNT, and they have an unsweetened one, which again, like at first it did taste like salty, minerally water, but I still like really like that taste now, and I actually
it takes adjustment.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
But then all of these too, like when you're reducing your sugar intake, it takes some time for your taste buds to adjust to that decrease in sugar, or, just kind of acclimating to different tastes. But yeah, electrolytes are so important. Like, Laura's mentioning, I recently just ran I ran a pretty long race, and I absolutely made sure I had one of my bottles full of electrolytes with me, because I was sweating a lot and getting rid of a lot of that salt. And so needed to make sure I was drinking that back in during the process. So, yeah, I think electrolytes are really important. But again, there's definitely one of those places with a lot of added sugar.
And dyes and artificial colors.
Yeah.
Not to demonize brands, but yeah, you want to be a little bit selective and picky with what you're putting in your body at the end. Rachel mentioned Element T. There's another one that I also like a lot. It's called Relight. They also have an unflavored version. It's less, I think they have a little bit less sodium compared to Element T. However, again, it's like depending on also like if your activity output is really high, you might need that high sodium content. And that's another thing that I want to bring on with electrolytes. You got to know that not all electrolytes have the same balance and ratios between magnesium, sodium, potassium, chloride, all of these things. So that's important to know, okay, well, am I using this after a really long run or after the gym? Like you need different electrolytes at certain different times. But yeah, that's, again, it gets complicated. I mean, we're just human and we're a little bit nuanced. It's just how it goes. But another brand that I really like is Paleo Valley. They add magnesium in the mix, and the way that they use potassium, they use magnesium through seaweed, and they add also potassium through coconut powder water. which is it's really tasty. They do most of these like Element Tea, Relight, Paleo Valley. They use sweeteners. Some of them. They also have unflavored, but the sweeteners that they use is usually like monk fruit or a little bit of stevia. I think it's, well, again, it's a sweetener, but it doesn't give you that horrible spike with other sugars. And then perhaps it's a little bit better compared to the other sugars that, like maybe a Gatorade or a Powerade may use. So there's also different types of sugars that may help more and may hurt a little bit more. But yeah, electrolytes important.
Yeah, something else to pay attention to with electrolytes is the colors. Some of the obvious ones, Gatorade and stuff like that, you can tell that the color is not natural at all. Artificial colors, basically. And with kids, there have been some research studies that, especially with like attention and things like that, that there can be an impact. So it's better to avoid that. And even sometimes some off the beaten path brands also use artificial colors, so just be careful with what you buy. Also, yeah, we always think of electrolytes for athletes, and that's true. But this is just my experience. This past winter, I played a little bit with electrolytes because my skin gets very dry in the winter, and I did find that it was helpful. So it can be helpful when we are stressed and things like that. Our body's consuming a lot of minerals. Yeah, and I also tried Organica, and I liked Organica. Yeah.
Very nice. So, sip or skip the electrolytes? I say sip.
Yeah, sip.
Yep. Oh, one more idea with electrolytes is coconut. Sorry, coconut water is also a type of electrolyte where naturally it's got different minerals in it and a little bit of sodium and a little bit of magnesium and things like that. So that's a good option, but you do want to be careful with the type of coconut water that you buy. And I don't know if we want to talk about that now, but
I mean, it could be like a good segment into it.
Okay,
but
there we go.
But you can also, I was just going to add, you could do adrenal mocktails. Have you ever heard of those? I'm sure it's a thing.
I've heard of
that.
It, but I haven't made one yet.
Okay, well, it's one of those drinks that it's very used in the replenishing your minerals kind of arena, adrenals, because your adrenals are output so much. They output your cortisol, and so they also kind of, whenever, again, it goes back to stress. If we're very stressed, then your adrenals are going to pumped harder, and then eventually they can get exhausted. So we want to support them through mineral repletion. And like Damaris was sharing, coconut water is an option. It's really high in potassium, but then what you can do is you can balance the ratios by adding a pinch of really high quality mineral rich salt for the sodium content. And then you can add maybe like a splash of vitamin C from like an orange juice concentrate, like a splash, or some lemon, or any type of like juice concentrate that you may find that doesn't have any added stuff, but just the juice. And then you can add a little bit of like sparkling water for that like sparkling, luxurious boutique experience. So yes, there's other ways. You don't have to buy the powders. You can also do it with simple ingredients that you bring together, and then you can make like a balanced drink, I guess.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it does sound good.
Yeah, there's so many out there. It's really good. It's a good way to add some electrolytes in a fun way. But yeah, this can segue into our coconut waters. Lots of them out there in the market. What do you think about that?
Rachel's lucky; she can probably get one right.
I know,
tree.
from her backyard.
We have a tree in our yard, so when
What was your drink right now, Rachel? Coconut.
But that's a good point. Also, I was gonna say, like with coconut water, if you can find the ones that have the flesh in it to get some of that like added fiber and the nutrients from the flesh, and not just the juice alone, those are my favorites.
Yeah. Other than that, I personally like Harmless Harvest. I've tried
Very
that.
delicious.
Like that one. Tastes great. It doesn't have sugar. A lot of coconut waters do have sugars. Many of them even have added sugars. But you're like, why? It's already delicious on its own. Yeah. That's my
That one though, I do have to say that it is on the higher price end.
Yes.
If you would go to the store, like that's something that tends to like scare people because one bottle might be like $10, you know.
Mm.
So again, it's one of those things that okay, you don't have to drink coconut water all day every day, you know, especially if you don't live in a place where coconuts are just right outside of your door. There's other ways where you can get potassium, like aloe vera, for example, aloe vera juice or even the leaf, really rich in, potassium. Potassium you can get from like root vegetables like sweet potatoes and I don't know what else. I guess, yeah, sweet potatoes.
Bananas.
Bananas, yeah, for example.
Yeah, but if you're traveling, take advantage and drink some fresh coconuts. I will say, like, after they pour it into your cup, ask them to open it just to make sure that the coconut is not moldy in any way, because that can happen.
Really? I've never experienced that, or I guess I've never asked someone to open the coconut. Oh well, actually, usually we tend to eat the little the fruit inside the pulp. Yeah.
Or you can just look inside. You can usually tell, but just to be on the careful end.
Good tip. Good to know. All right, so yeah, sip that coconut water. Just make sure that it doesn't have any added sugar, and local, fresh. The better it gets. But if it's not possible, then here and there, investing in one of those Harvest brand coconut waters. And then the next thing that I had in the list, unless you guys have anything that you really want to make sure, but I also have like green drinks. Those green powders. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Who would benefit from these green powders? What are red flags? And what are some simple, easy alternatives that we can do instead of buying the green powder?
Yeah, when the first thought that comes to my mind with a lot of these like green powders, kind of like we were talking about cost with like coconut water, but is the added cost for a lot of these green powders. They're typically quite pricey. And we don't want to look at them kind of like Laura was talking about earlier, like as a meal replacement. They tend to be marketed as like get all of your greens through this one drink. Which I think we would all agree that that's not at all what we're trying to do with these drinks, is to replace a meal, to replace the whole sources of fiber. You can get a lot of like different vitamins and minerals and adaptogens that they add to these mixes and things like that, but you can also get that through your food. So if you're trying to skip your servings of vegetables because you drank your green juice, then I would say it's a skip and go for your whole plant foods instead. And then again, the price of that, I think it's great if you like the taste and you want to get those added benefits in addition to your other meals, and you have the financial means to kind of add that to your pantry. But those are just some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, something else to consider is for kids especially and pregnant moms, some of these, if you think about it, like it's a lot of produce they're trying to minimize, kind of like supplements. You want to be careful with where the brands got it from. Are they reputable? And then because sometimes with supplements, something that I'm usually aware of is there any data on heavy metals? And this kind of applies also to this kind of category of drinks because it's kind of similar to a supplement. Has the brand been tested for heavy metals? What are the results? Recently, some brands are not doing as well in terms of that. So for pregnant moms and kids, I would be careful with that sometimes. You can always make a green drink at home. You can always make a fresh green juice or eat your greens, preferably, then you've got the fiber as well. But something to be aware of and consider for moms and kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit that I think marketing got me there with the greens. I was buying AG1, which is all over, like it was in the TV. I was like listening in podcasts, celebrities, all of these people that I was following that I really like feel like I was trusting their knowledge and their research and all of that. And then I would just listen to them. Yeah, and AG1 and na. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a try. I've heard it like 5, 6, 7 times. It must be good. And then, I started, I tried it. It was good. But then I went to this naturopath, and then she was like, okay, what are you drinking? And then she showed me, and she's like, this is not you're just putting your money, and then you're not really getting that much, because the amount of vitamins and the milligrams is just not enough. Even like at this point, you're just drinking powder with expensive marketing, So yeah, it's one of those things that even as a person that has studied nutrition, I also get into the marketing sometimes, or into like what these other celebrities said, and like or even people that has been in research, like the Huberman lab or whatever. He does research. He's someone that speaks in like universities in a very high level, like podcasts and stuff like that. And he would recommend that. And so I was like, well, he must have done the research. I didn't do it myself. And then, yeah, all it take was going to the naturopath, and she was like, I don't think this is enough for your daily requirements. I think you could spend that with real food, or even on a different way, and you can just save that money on something else. And I was like, okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it might not necessarily be harmful for most people, but how much is it benefiting compared to the advertisement is the question, right? And how much is it benefiting you and your health goals is the question too. So it's something to really think about.
Yeah.
It's just like all these others. Like, it's not necessarily, like you're saying, it's not necessarily bad. If you like the taste, you do want to enjoy that. Maybe you're traveling, and that is a good way to get some of the, different vitamins and minerals, like while you're on the plane or something like that. Like, it can be utilized to provide benefits. But yeah, definitely not like a meal replacement or something you need to have on a daily basis to, your health relies on that. Back to the marketing and kind of like all of the drinks that we're discussing, I think that these green powders have kind of become like the whole form of like all these different pieces. They have probiotics in them, they have the prebiotics in them, they have the dietary fiber, they have this nutrient, that nutrient, they've got your electrolytes. They kind of bundled all of it into one to make it seem like the main source. And it can be a good source of that, but again, variety, still focusing on your diet and all the other things.
And just also look at the label, like there's people sharing about these names, but sometimes you gotta wonder, like, well, if they had so many people have to talk about it, what did they get on the back end? Like, did they really use it, or was it something that they were like, hey, I'll give you here these if you promote my product or whatever? Like, those are the things that sometimes I think we need a little bit more honesty and transparency. And then, yeah, there's some brands that are maybe better than others. And I think it all kind of comes back to reading at the label and doing a little bit of like the taking responsibility and doing the due diligence of like, okay, compared to this brand, is this like a good fit for me right now? That maybe, like Rachel was saying, maybe I'm on a trip, and then it's just easy to add some extra minerals and vitamins and stuff like that, because perhaps I'm not in my routine and it's harder for me to find like foods. Then it could be a good way of like adding some extra nutrition. But is this a meal replacement? No, again, no. And then maybe there's other more useful ways of like spending your money.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say like these.
Yeah. Agreed.
Me too. Yep.
All right, so I do have a few more that we can go through, but how do we feel here right now?
Yeah, I think we covered some ground.
I do want to briefly talk about one more, which is like nutritional shakes for kids specifically.
Okay, protein shakes, or which ones?
Yeah, so these are, well, I guess protein shakes is a whole other category, but these are more like nutritional
That's
shakes
a big one.
that are more like meal replacements.
Like Ensure and...
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that we sometimes see patients that need it. Not always, but sometimes picky kids, it is something that can help for a short amount of time, just while we're still working towards getting nutrition in. And there are a couple of brands that I do like because they're whole food based, and they're not super well known. So I just thought I'd mention it because the common ones that are out there are like Orgain and Ensure and things like that, which are like the hospital ones. But for kids, there is Kate Farms Kids Nutrition, and then there's also LC Kids Nutrition Shake, and they're whole foods based. They don't quite make the cut on fully replacing a meal, but to support a picky kid, it's okay. So yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, and then I think also for certain people going through some chronic diseases can be really helpful. Like people with Parkinson's usually like tend to do this because they have low appetite and stuff like that. And so extra added shakes that can provide some, it's easier to digest. But often also, whenever I talk to these patients, I recommend also that there's also ways of like adding that type of nutrition without buying the shake. It's just the convenient part, like if you don't have a lot of time, it's convenient, you have it ready and you just open and drink. Convenient. But you can also make your shake, at home. You can use some collagen powder, or you can use, some pea protein or whatever, something that can add a little bit of oomph, and then add some sort of like a source of fat, and then you can blend that, and then it just becomes a shake.
Yeah, absolutely. I love sending recommendations of the actual recipes to patients as a priority, and then if you can't meet that, then here's an option. But it is, of course, ideal if you can make it on your own. And it's really not that difficult to make a high-calorie, nutrient-dense smoothie when you are a smoothie lover. You can do so much with smoothies. It's really cool.
Yeah, you can pack a lot and the blender does a little bit of the work for you. It pre-digests for you. So lots of people that have like low appetite issues, this can be like a really nice strategy because you're more prone to like, it's easier for you to get like liquids compared to like the solid food whenever you're having those like low appetite days or even nausea. And at least you're getting in some calories and some nutrition that way. So yeah, I'd say for me it would be like these, just because, I guess it's case dependent, depending on where you are. Sometimes you don't need the protein shake. Again, it's a supplement. It should be supplemental, not as a replacement, but certain people may need it as extra, like the meal, but then maybe they need more than one and stuff like that. But yeah,
and ideally we are using it as a supplement, and when you're working with a dietitian, you're working towards getting in food again via your mouth and tolerating and expanding your palate and all these kinds of things. But like Laura mentioned, sometimes it can be helpful for certain stages of life or certain disease states or disease stages, or elderly people sometimes as well.
Yes. And then I guess, how are we feeling? Like, I feel like we talked a lot about some of the like biggest groups of like the healthy drinks out there. I guess a big beast that I think we can just like talk a little bit on, but I don't know, maybe we need more time. It's the whole protein shakes, like not the shakes, but just also like protein powders and stuff like that. There's so much out there, so many things in the market, plant-based, animal-based, so wide. And I guess this could be our last big topic, I think.
Yeah, or we could even jump into it and like dig deeper next time too.
That too. Maybe we'll do like specific topic or conversation around like protein powders because it's big.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the same considerations that we discussed with the last ones will still apply. I will say that, like, I'm sure you guys agree, like, as plant-based dietitians, like, I'm all for supplementing with protein shakes as needed with, again, all those other things in consideration. But they have their place. They can have their place because getting protein in on a plant-based diet is more difficult. You need to be more mindful of it. So this is a great tool to have in your toolbox.
Yeah, depending on what your goals are, right? As well, if you're trying to gain muscle, you might need to get that supplementation of, if you're only on plants, you might definitely need to get some supplement protein, because it's really hard to get to all of the needs just with food. So you might need to do like the supplemental part. But yeah, I guess all we can all agree that we usually tend to prefer food first. And if we cannot do that, then we use tools and supplements as a supplement, not as a replacement. And then, kind of like what we've been talking about with the other topics and names and drinks, which is take a look at the label. The longer the list of the label, then the more questions you want to ask yourself, like, do I really need all of these? The shorter the label, then the less ingredients they're using, which is better. And added sugar, I think, is one of those that you want to keep an eye always, because it can get sneaky out there.
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone also, don't forget to drink water. It is definitely a sip drink. Yeah, there we go. And if you want to make water more flavorful, you can add herbal teas to it. You can add fruit teas to it. You can add lemon juice to it, and it wouldn't cause it to become a meal. It's still very healthy. And then there are lots of, like, a lot of these products have come out in the last 5-10 years, really. And so you can make a lot more informed choices now when you want to opt for a healthier version of a fun drink or a special occasion drink, or a drink that you need for as an athlete or as someone with a certain disease state or as a child. Like, there's a lot of options now. And so if you need help or if you need guidance, you can ask for help or do your research, read the nutrition label.
Yeah, and one last thing that I would share is that the more we come back to nature, the less we have to decode a label, so it gets easy. We just have to go back to kind of basics sometimes. And then something that I would like to kind of leave out there is, like, if it takes a marketing team and a celebrity to convince us that the drink is healthy, then it's really worth pausing and asking, like, would I have chosen this 50 years ago? If not, maybe it's time to go back to our roots and the basics.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Good questions.
Good point. Good questions. But yeah, so with these, I think we covered a lot it feels like short, but it's been 47 minutes. So I think
we've been talking about a lot of drinks.
A lot of drinks. Hopefully you get to take some with you home, some reflections, some questions, some red flags, and also like some simple alternatives. And yeah, just remember that simplicity is also sometimes underrated. All right. Anyone else have any other last words before we say goodbye?
No, thanks for this chat. It was great
Perfect.
to talk about some of these ideas.
Yes, thank you so much, Damaris. Thank you, Rachel. And please, if you want more information and if you want any help and you think this is overwhelming and there's a lot, then please come to Married to Health. We have like all types of specialties, and we will be happy and gladly to work with you, to guide you, and so we can navigate all of these together.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So with that, thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.